Good afternoon and welcome. In this session, we're going to be exploring the innovation economy and how it can help create jobs and opportunity in the North as we move away from the pandemic. My name is Chris Hulme. I'm a director at Influential, and I'll be guiding us through this discussion, which is in three parts. We're going to start by speaking with Lord Jim O'Neill, the renowned economist and one of the founders of the Northern Powerhouse Partnership. His accomplishments include serving in government as a Treasury Minister, and he's here today in his capacity as Vice Chair of the Northern Powerhouse Partnership. So I'd like to welcome Lord O'Neill to the stage.
Hello, Chris. I hope you can see and hear me. I'm finding the technology slightly tricky to navigate, but you're nodding, so I guess that must be the case. Nice to be here. Thanks for having me.
Great. Thanks very much for coming along. Lots of talk today about levelling up. What does it mean in the context of the Northern Powerhouse Partnership?
Wow, I would love to know. I could spend hours talking about that, but I'll try not to. I'll give you a few brief responses. First of all, to be fair to the government, it's only been in power 15 months and its whole life short of what, 6-7 weeks, being completely dominated by COVID management. So it's pretty hard to fathom out quite what their priorities other than COVID management are, judging by deed rather than word. Secondly, however, talk about talking the talk. Levelling up is the slogan that's going to sort of seemingly brand this government for the whole of its life. So I think one has to hope, and I would be like this if I was somebody very close to Boris, that they are going to walk the walk as well as talk the talk, because otherwise they are building political challenges for themselves by not being serious about it. Thirdly, as to what it means, it could mean endless things. Ultimately, in my opinion, it should be about, if there was one thing to really highlight, the answer would be education for the most disadvantaged. But I think, of the way the government feels about it, is it's basically about geographic levelling up and trying to make sure the country isn't just dominated by London and the Southeast. So in that sense, I'd call it cousin of the Northern Powerhouse, and sympathetic to the ambitions of the Northern Powerhouse, which I was so heavily involved in, and still am.
What for you are the most important metrics? How do we know if we're making progress? How do we know if we're leaving people behind?
So I would say, again, I could spend hours on this, but three things in view of the time. Firstly, it is very important to not, in this 24/7 world we live, to rush to judgments. The scale of the inequality and the productivity differentials in the UK are so complex and persisted for so long. It'll take a generation to figure out whether whatever policy initiatives and other things are working or not. So actually, I think we're still not much more than 6 years from when the phrase Northern Powerhouse was first uttered by George Osborne. So, it's still early days. So I think people have to acknowledge, particularly when it comes to education and skills, that you can't change these things on a dime. Second thing to say, however, there are a few numbers that one can monitor geographically on an active basis. And as I've often said for much of that period, actually, contrary to how a lot of people think about these things, at least as it relates to the Northwest, for much of the period from 2015 to pre-COVID, the Northwest was actually outperforming other parts of the country, including London at times, and definitely other parts of the North. And whether that was a coincidence or something more just to do with the Northern Powerhouse is again, too early to tell, but I think it perhaps did. And the third thing to say, it ultimately depends on all the what I call the six necessities all being persistently followed, and that is very quickly education, separately skills, thirdly infrastructure, including transport, but otherwise as well, including digital. Fourthly, crucially, devolution. We need much more devolved powers to city regions and elsewhere. More engagement and shifting of business, fifthly. And then lastly, more genuine ambition from people that are in these left behind areas to try and behave in a different way and not just assume that life owes them something because of their history.
I see you graduated Sheffield University in 1978. You know, punk rock, Thatcherism, mass unemployment was just coming after that. We had a very different economy then. Is tech the answer now? Is innovation the answer? Is that what would give you confidence about? Can we innovate our way out of this?
Well, I don't think everybody trying to be great at tech is the slightest sensible thing to do. Right? You know, everybody can't be good at the same thing. What the North has to do is to pick what its real genuine assets are to be potentially, literally a global leader that other areas don't have and can't compete with, rather than all rushing to be the, you know, champions of whatever the fashionable thing is. And my goodness me, it obviously is tech. And that would be a wiser path. That said, tech obviously involves virtually every aspect of our lives. Look at what you and I are doing right now. But I would think for the North to really deliver persistently beneficial, higher value-added growth and lasting productivity improvements, a lot of it has got to be based around alternative energies, advanced manufacturing, Sheffield being a beautiful example. I thought we were going to wade straight into that. As I said to many people before, the Sheffield Advanced Manufacturing, the Rotherham Advanced Manufacturing Centre, is located where Arthur Scargill's last pitched battle took place. And so it's a perfect illustration of the sort of thing that is needed, but on a much bigger scale. And then thirdly, I'd throw in life sciences as well.
Yeah. If we had 60 seconds more of your time, could we just ask you about China? You famously coined the phrase brick economies. Where can Northern businesses go now, given fraught relationships we have globally?
Well, you asked me that after yet another tricky week on the whole China relationship. It's very complicated, but it's also bothersome how a lot of people want to swing into some sort of active position on aspects of the relationship with China without thinking it through. You can see the pendulum has swung dramatically since the time I was in government with Cameron and Osborne, where some might say there was too much focus on the economics and not on security and defense. And as evidenced by the so-called integrated review last week, which was really powerful on the security and the defense, but virtually absent on anything to do with economics. And frankly, it's swinging too far in the opposite direction.
Lord O'Neill, thank you ever so much for joining us today. We're very grateful for your support.
My pleasure.
Thank you. Right, I'd now like to welcome Neil Murray, the Chief Executive of Impact Data Metrics, to join us.
Hi, Chris.
Hi. So Impact Data Metrics was commissioned by the business desk to produce a report that looks at how the North is doing in terms of developing an innovation-led economy. So we're going to discuss that with Neil. The report will be available shortly on the business desk website. It's called Chasing Unicorns, Innovation-Led Growth in the North. Neil, tell us about the report. What did you investigate and why?
Well, I think one of the things that we were keen to look at was innovation performance across the region. So understanding where the North is doing well and where improvements could be made. We identified 5 pillars, which, you know, are very similar to some of the things that Jim was just talking about, but 5 pillars that support innovation-led growth. So the fundamental research itself, where the ideas come from, the business base that supports translation of those ideas into commercial growth, the infrastructure that those businesses need to perform in, the workforce and skills that support that, and crucially, funding that gives those businesses the lifeblood that they need. So it was about understanding where there are successes and identifying how opportunities for learnings could be shared across the North, you know, to raise the whole region up.
So chasing unicorns, why are unicorns so important?
Unicorns are the apex predators, if you like, of companies. You know, they're rapidly growing, dynamic businesses valued at over $1 billion. But while they're at the top of the pyramid, there's a whole slew of companies underneath that where the next generation of unicorns are going to come from that are supporting that growth. And they can only thrive if there's an ecosystem around there that encourages and supports the growth that they're looking for.
People doubtless understand that in any part of the world, starting and scaling businesses in the sort of R&D innovation space, it's going to involve fundamentals like skills, funding, infrastructure, and actually generating the right ideas in the first place. Do we have the right playbook for innovation now?
I think there are things that we do well, there are things that we do less well. And I'm talking about the UK in that regard. There are definitely lessons that can be learned from how other regions around the world that are successful with innovation translation execute on their strategies. Within the UK, the Golden Triangle is always held up as the best performing region for innovation translation. And there are certainly things that the North can learn from there. But there are also inherent advantages there that mean that it's easier to do things in London and the Southeast than the East of England. But definitely, you know, there are things that we can do to improve, no question.
On the back of the analysis and report, you make 10 recommendations. Can you just give us the headlines? I mean, half of them are about financial activity, aren't they? Could we start there?
Yeah, I mean, the reason for the big focus on measures to improve financial support is that, as I've said already, cash is the lifeblood of growing companies. You know, one of the things that I found most surprising when we were doing the analysis for the report, if you look at the gross expenditure on R&D across the UK, about 14% of that happens in the North, and about 56% of that happens in the Golden Triangle. If you then look at where private capital is coming into businesses, early stage funding, so EIS and SEIS funding, only about 7% of UK funding goes into the North, with over 75% going into the Golden Triangle. And then when you look at VC funding, it's even worse. You know, it's 6% to the North and 84% to the Golden Triangle. And those are, to get comparisons there, we've looked at the most recent figures on gross expenditure, which is 2018. If you look at 2020, VC funding, only 4% of it came to the North, and 86% came to the Golden Triangle. Now that, I would argue, that funding isn't helping companies in the region. You could argue that it's actually hindering their growth rather than helping, because it's so difficult for them to go and chase funding.
There's a kind of sad irony there, isn't there? Because there's a feeling that management teams in sci-tech businesses just spend far too much time fundraising. They have to queue up for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, whereas maybe on the West Coast of America, you just get the support up front. You know, is that the case still? Do you see it improving? Without
question, it is definitely still the case. I mean, you know, innovation-driven businesses need to be able to focus on their growth without worrying about how they're going to keep the doors open. That's something that the US clusters do an awful lot better than we do here in the UK. I think it's something that, you know, as we look forward, there are some signs that it's starting to change, perhaps. You know, areas like VC funding into biotech in companies in the southeast of England. You're seeing some bigger slugs of capital coming in there. And we may well see slow change, but we need that change to happen much more quickly. We need to free up capital for business growth.
The report stresses it's not just about raising capital or getting hold of capital, but how it's deployed as well. Would you like to say a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, you know, where we have had interventionist funds in the regions, the way that fund managers are remunerated means that they tend to be a bit risk averse. So they tend to deploy lots of small amounts of capital across lots of businesses, rather than trying to identify realistic winners that they can then fund with meaningful amounts of capital. And that's something that we've got to change as we go forward. You know, we have to make sure that the businesses that are going to be the next unicorns get the opportunity to reach that kind of status.
For me, the most radical idea in the report is that we need a new statutory body, a bit like Transport for the North, who are here today. You called it the Innovation Forum for the North, with the wherewithal really to direct and advise investment and policy. Can you tell us a little bit more about that? How would it work? How does it not step on the toes of what we have already?
Well, it's interesting. You know, there's an awful lot of good things being done in the North. That, you know, one thing that we try and make sure that we point out in the report is that you know, we're not being negative about what's going on in the north, but it's about how we can improve. And it was interesting to see the launch of Innovation GM yesterday, which kind of mirrors some of the things that we're talking about, but looking as a pan-northern body instead. And I think this is the key thing. You know, there's a lot of good stuff in Greater Manchester, but there's an awful lot better stuff elsewhere in the north that is complementary to that. And it's about making sure that we make use of the connections and collaborations that deliver a better offering across the region. And we're suggesting that the way to do that is to put a body in place that has an overarching responsibility for developing and delivering on innovation policy in the north, to make sure that the north, you know, puts its best foot forward.
Obviously, one of the overarching economic challenge is going to become paying for the pandemic, isn't it? What role do you see innovation having there? Can we innovate our way out of this? Do you feel optimistic, confident about that?
Well, I have to say, I completely agree with what Jim was saying earlier. You know, innovation is a fundamental driver of growth. There is no question of that. But it's not just about everybody doing the same trendy things. It's about focusing on what you're good at, focusing on offerings that are distinctive and differentiated, and where you can be truly world class. And there are lots of opportunities for that across the north that can be built upon.
Great. Well, thanks for that, Neil. If you'd stay where you are, I'd now like to welcome a couple of business leaders from across the north who are going to help us with this discussion. We have Tim Newns, who's the Chief Executive of MIDAS, Greater Manchester's Inward Investment Agency. Hi, Tim.
Hi, Chris. Great to be here.
Thank you very much. And we have Tom Davies as well, who is a director of Robiquity, a company specializing in robot process automation. Great to see you both.
Hi, Chris. Hi, Neil.
Hi, guys.
Tim, if I could start with you, could I just get some reaction from you in respect of Lord O'Neill's remarks?
Yeah, I mean, I think obviously would agree with largely everything he says, I suppose. We've worked a lot with Jim O'Neill over the years, probably know over the years, I should say. He was integral in the Manchester Independent Economic Review, so just over 10 years ago, which pretty much led to a decade of economic vision for Greater Manchester. And, you know, we redid that process a couple of years ago now with a prosperity review, as we called it, which then led to our local industrial strategy development with central government. So I think in terms of a lot of what Jim said, I think some of the things that probably I'll go on to talk about in terms of, you know, some of our local industrial strategy, but also Innovation GM that you've mentioned today is all part of that reaction to how, you know, how we see our economic vision for Greater Manchester going forward, how we see inclusive growth, how we see building on some of the success that we've had in Greater Manchester and the wider region, and really how we can work with central government to take that on to the next level, really. So, you know, I can go into a bit more detail when we come around to that.
What about you, Tom?
Yeah, I think building on the comments that Jim's made and Neil's backed up as well, the point I would make is that if the North is going to succeed, then it's on the basis of businesses in the North being competitive and remaining and growing their competitive position nationally and internationally. And from my point of view, from our business's point of view, we're at the coalface of what is in effect. Make no mistake, we're in the middle of the next industrial revolution. It's not something that's coming. It's not a sound bite around the fourth industrial revolution. We're in it. And businesses are either falling by the wayside or succeeding and thriving because they're grasping the opportunity of this revolution. And to put it really bluntly, this is a revolution that says, if you're going to survive and thrive and be competitive, then you have to build your business around a very clear separation of human skills and effectively automated or robotic skills. And when I say robotic, I don't mean, you know, a metal Mickey in the corner. I mean the software automation of tasks that we used to pay and still pay human beings to do. So when we talk about shifting of back office into cheaper towns in this region, or having shared services and global business services in this region. In 1, 2, 3 years, these won't exist. They will be 100. We're seeing those are going to be 100% automated, and it's happening now. It's undeniable. So my point of view, our point of view from Robiquity is, as a commitment to the North, it's about making sure that business leaders in this region grasp that concept, make it real, and build their businesses around human skills. And it's those human skills, you know, Jim said it's not about tech, it's about human skills of, you know, design, ingenuity, service, empathy, and all the jobs that are associated with that. They're the ones that we need to focus on. And if we don't do it fast, then the North will miss out. Chris, you're on mute.
There, I thought it might be me. Tim, can you tell us about Innovation GM? Launched yesterday, £7 billion blueprint for 100,000 jobs. It's a big vision. How are you going to deliver it?
Yeah, and apologies, I didn't go into much detail about sort of reaction to Jim, but I was just conscious that I could have gone for quite a long time if I started to go into Innovation GM. But I think a few of Jim's points, like I say, will very much hopefully act as really, really good context to why we've launched what we've launched. And I mean, Jim mentioned a number of things in terms of digital not being the be all and end all, which I completely agree with, notwithstanding the fact that we have a number of digital unicorns in Greater Manchester and the surrounding Northwest. I think 6 of the 14 UK unicorns are in that, you know, that region, which is a phenomenal amount. And I think, you know, on the basis that 35% of Europe's unicorns are in the UK, that means that 15% of Europe's unicorns are right slap bang in this region, in the Northwest, you know, and in the North. So that's a huge positive platform to build upon. But it goes well beyond that. And I think some of his points around, you know, obviously, and Neil's made these points as well about the London centricity of government funding into innovation and into the Golden Triangle as well. Again, there's a really interesting book by Ross Baird called The Innovation Blind Spot, which talks about essentially, you know, VCs, etc., capital tend to go to the same places to search for innovation. And actually some of the brightest, boldest, most interesting innovations take place in, you know, all kinds of different places around the world and in countries. And if you look at those unicorns, for example, in Greater Manchester, again, they didn't come about through the city. They came about in Bolton in terms of AO, or in sort of Northwich in terms of the Hook Group. You know, they've come out of towns, they've come out of rural areas even in that sense. So I think, you know, that all acts as a really, I think, interesting backdrop as to why we've gone down the route we've gone. But just to give you a sort of a little bit of a backdrop to what was announced yesterday. So a couple of years ago, as I say, Greater Manchester sort of launched its local industrial strategy with government, which looked at what our key assets really are, and key opportunities and unique assets, as has been said by Neil, really, in terms of, you know, as opposed to a Me Too type of philosophy of economic development. And we launched our economic vision as well earlier this year, which is very much around Build Back Better, as you'd expect, but again, still building on those local industrial and scientific and innovation assets that we have in the background to that. And that's also in the context of a net zero and low carbon environment as well. And obviously we have the target Greater Manchester of 2038 to be net zero. And so that's got to be a big driver. But the other big driver is inclusive growth. And it's exactly that. You know, this whole discussion really is about inclusive growth in the UK, which means inclusive growth in the North. And in the way that, you know, we're looking for inclusive growth within Greater Manchester, that also means inclusive growth for the North, and how Manchester can help to be that engine to benefit the wider North. So a few, you know, 6-9 months ago, really, we started to develop Innovation GM. And really we see Innovation GM as a blueprint for levelling up. It echoes, as Neil said, it echoes an awful lot of what he said in his report. And I think some of those pillars that was mentioned, the only one I'd add to that potentially is brand and reputation. And I suppose I would say that because I do work on the marketing side of things. But I do think, you know, all the things that's mentioned there in terms of infrastructure, skills, you know, innovation, etc., that all is absolutely builds the ecosystem. But if nobody knows about that outside those places, then it's never going to fulfill its full potential. And I think that's definitely somewhere where the North still lacks in terms of our global profile for innovation. And whereas certain elements, I think we could legitimately say that some of the city profiles have risen over the last few years, but there's still a long way to go even on that context. But certainly, we're not necessarily still known for the right things. So Manchester, Liverpool have huge global brands potentially, but led by football and music and some of those things. And it's how do we get those brands synonymous with the innovation agenda, with the science agenda, and that high value agenda. So Innovation GM really is a chance to build this umbrella organization, bring some of that finance together, to actually build a bit of a fighting fund, if you like, to really start to drive investment into some of these areas. But look at a translational innovation approach. So how do we take those assets, many of which are in the central areas of Manchester, like the Oxford Road corridor, where the universities are and some of the big institutes, and how do we push that out into the wider areas of Greater Manchester? So, part of that proposal, and one of the initial sort of pipeline proposals, is about an advanced manufacturing and materials park in Gateway North in Rochdale and Bury, which is very similar to the type of AMRC model that Jim mentioned in Rotherham. And that is exactly it, how Sheffield University has pushed its expertise into Rotherham, leading to investments from the likes of Boeing and McLaren as well. And we're looking at a similar approach, but different themes for different places. So it might be advanced materials in Rochdale, it might be advanced healthcare innovation in Wythenshawe, or someone like that, for example. And we're working with each of our districts now and other towns and areas of Greater Manchester. What are the different themes and expertise that they have in their areas that can then actually translate into something. But it's how you really translate the value of the centre and some of those assets, key science and innovation assets, and push that out. But it has to be top down and bottom up. So, it has to be about the types of programs that likes the growth company run. Made Smarter has been a really great program around digital transformation of companies, for example. So how do you build on those that are bottom up and help, grow that organic base, and couple that with, drawing sort of almost non-organic investment, whether it be foreign direct investment, which is my role, or, a combination of government and business investment, which really starts to boost exponentially that level of science and innovation. And the key aim ultimately is to help the government target to build to that 2.4% of GDP being in innovation. And ultimately we feel by doing that, as I say, we can create about £7 billion worth of GVA and an extra 100,000 jobs. But as I say, be that blueprint for how you can actually level up through innovation.
Tom, what impact does this have on you? Are you, presumably pleased to be that you're in a city that's so focused on innovation? What are your big challenges growing Robiquity?
Yeah, the challenge actually, the biggest challenge is it's not just about keeping up with demand. It's that this is so fast moving. So the innovation and expenditure into helping organizations to digitize and automate their businesses from a technology perspective is moving at pace. And that is what is applying this pressure on organizations to adopt it to stay competitive. You've then also got businesses, as Tim mentioned, born in this region, the likes of AO.com and the Hut, and they've built Boohoo, another example. They've built their businesses on a digital first backbone. So they've adopted it from their moment of birth, and you can see how that almost launches them to become world leaders. So as a real example of this working from the bottom up, you've got three really, really clear examples of it in this region here. The next challenge is how do we take the existing businesses and make sure that they can adopt it and move that way as well, so that they don't die on the vine, because the best opportunity for people and towns and skills and our economy is to grow the businesses we've already got, rather than, of course, we've got to think long term. And you know, I have personal experience of working with the AMRC over in Rotherham, and it's fantastic, but it's still in that right at the left-hand side of R&D, moving forward into production. How do we help people right now? And the best people to help people right now and preserve or grow, you know, the competitiveness of the region is to help them digitize quickly. This isn't I'll come back to, you know, my opening point. This isn't a you know, it isn't a 5 to 10 year play. It's a 1 to 2 year play. People will disappear. You know, they'll be the next Debenhams. So that's what our challenge is. How do we help businesses now, whilst, you know, the fundamentals are put in place to help them in the future?
Could you just, for anyone who's not familiar with it, could you just tell us a little bit more about robotic process innovation? You know, how does it apply? How are you going to scale your business?
Yeah, so if you think about any business in any sector, I come back to this point around the balance of what we now call human skills and robotic skills. So robotic skills are those things that we used to or still do pay people to do, typically in the back office, processing transactions, dealing with accounts, doing repetitive, mundane administrative tasks, entering information into multiple systems, extracting information from multiple systems. It's, you know, there are hundreds and thousands of hours of every day being spent on those activities. That area, if you're still doing that, you will not remain competitive. It's a fact. So what robotic process automation does is take those tasks and automate them. Now, the potentially frightening thing that says is, oh no, that's going to mean businesses are going to lose jobs. People are going to lose jobs hand over fist. But the reality is, if you look back over any industrial revolution, what it does is it creates opportunity. So it means that those businesses become lean. It means that you get far more opportunity in roles that are far more appropriate for the skills of humans. Design of great products for retail. You know, ingenuity in shifting design in sectors like manufacturing. Insight, so that if information can be presented instantly instead of having to spend hours and hours on spreadsheets, you can make faster decisions. So it inherently makes businesses more competitive, which means they can grow, which means they can hire new people. So it's a productivity and growth agenda, is process automation. It's not just about removing jobs that don't have a future.
Great. Okay, thanks. Tim, could you say a little bit about the challenges of working with other northern cities, given that you're all competing for inward investment? How can you make the sum of the parts add up to a greater whole? I mean, you reference brand, you know, but much wider than that. I think you're on mute, actually.
Doing so well as well. Yeah, just to go to back to some of Neil's point, really, I think when people are comfortable with what their own assets are and what their own strengths are, then that all becomes much more straightforward. And I think we're much more in that type of place across the north at the moment, partly because the work, you know, that's happened over the last few years with the Northern Powerhouse sort of initiative, and, you know, a greater communication between different parts of the north about different things. So if you look at, you know, towards COP26, for example, there's a lot of work going on with Net Zero Northwest, you know, was collaborating on what we might do together on that. You look at the free ports piece, you know, where we back Liverpool on that application. And I know other similar things happened in other parts of the north with different, you know, Leeds backed Humberside, you know, all those types of things. So I think it's a different place. I mean, there is a point with FDI, with foreign direct investment, that obviously it comes down to a competitive play, if you like. But that happens even within Greater Manchester. You know, it comes down to a point where we might get an organisation interested in Greater Manchester, and then it's a question of, right, well, will they go to Wigan or Rochdale or Manchester, or, you know? So that's something we cope with even at a sort of micro economic level, if you like. And but we get on really, really well with our sort of opposite numbers in Leeds and Newcastle and Liverpool. And as I say, more and more, the Khalifa report on fintech that was produced last week or a couple of weeks ago, for example, puts Manchester and Leeds together as a cluster for fintech. And they call it the Pennine cluster, which we probably wouldn't go down that route in terms of brand. But certainly, together we are the most significant fintech cluster outside London. Apart, we probably just about still are individually, but certainly not in the position that we are together. So, we're having discussions around that. As I say, there's low carbon work going on with the wider Northwest, and again, the sort of overarching supply chain of health, for example, again across the north, certainly Northwest in Cheshire, and manufacturing of pharmaceuticals down in Liverpool, and some of the biopharma and biomedical research that happens in Greater Manchester and Cheshire. All that, is it just works perfectly together, really. So I think there's a lot of examples already of where the North is working together. I think there's a lot more confidence of individual places' identity and their role and their expertise and specialisms. So I'm much more optimistic, I think, about how we work together across the North and use, whether it's an initiative like Innovation Gem in Greater Manchester that might act as a blueprint and be echoed sort of across wider parts of the country, or whether it's other initiatives that we get together on in the North. I'm pretty optimistic on that front, really.
Thank you for that. Neil, could we talk about some of the other fundamentals of growing the innovation economy? If we started with place, impact data metrics based in Liverpool, you've got the Knowledge Quarter coming out of the ground there. All sorts of amazing stuff all over Manchester, Circle Square, you've got Alderley Park as well, absolutely world class. If you build it, will they come in the post-pandemic world?
It's never been a case of if you build it, they will come. You've still got to build the right things and have the right environment for them to thrive in, or they won't come. I think I would just like to, this thing about place though, I would just like to pick up on some things that Tim was saying. I think he's absolutely right. It's certainly different than it was 10 years ago, but I still think there are barriers in place, and particularly around things like academic research. I don't see the levels of collaboration in academic research that there should be, and especially there between academia and industry. It was interesting seeing some of the metrics. I mean, we deliberately in the report looked by local authority rather than looking by institution. But it was interesting to see, for example, some of the levels of the relative levels of industrial collaboration that were happening in different local authorities with their academic institutions. But as well as that, I agree with what Tim was saying, but a lot of what he was saying was Northwest examples. There aren't that many examples that are across the North. And, we highlight one example in the report, which is the discussion going on around the future of the Vauxhall plant at Ellesmere Port. And, one of the arguments the owners have, or not so much arguments, but one of the challenges they say they have about turning that into an electric vehicle manufacturing plant is the cost of importing batteries from Europe. Well, we've got a rather large battery manufacturing facility in the Northeast that is currently reported to be operating at about 30% of capacity. Surely there's got to be a way of figuring that one out. So I think I know that's probably a simplification, but there are opportunities beyond what we're doing now. Some progress has been made, unquestionably, but there are opportunities beyond that. There are also opportunities to learn from what other areas are doing, and I think they're particularly around education. A lot of, it goes back to what Jim was saying about the challenges of education in underprivileged areas. There is a huge amount more that can be done there. And when we looked at education in the report, we saw some very stark examples where, local authorities that are relatively close together that have similar deprivation profiles, but are at opposite ends of the spectrum in terms of education performance. Why is that happening? Why isn't, somebody getting there and joining the dots between the two and taking the learnings from one and exploiting them in the other to to bring them up. So, you know, there are a huge number of opportunities that remain across the region for better collaboration, better cooperation that improves the standard for everyone.
If we could just stay on skills then for a minute, how much of an issue is that for you, Tom, in terms of growing your business, getting the right people in?
Yeah, no, really good question. From a skills perspective, we're actually seeing a trend towards effectively youngsters skipping the university stage and coming direct into sectors like ours if they've got the necessary skills, because they can be trained and they can be exposed to clients and to different challenges and to opportunities that would normally, by running them through years and years of academia, have taken significantly longer time. So again, back to my challenge around timescales, it's about bringing people through, giving them practical experience on the job if they've got the basic raw materials, and we can make them into very, very capable, highly skilled people in this new way of working that everyone's going to see. Because once you introduce innovation in any area, either through technology or otherwise, then you need people who not only are on the receiving end of that innovation, but you need the managers of that innovation, the administrators of that innovation, to make it a success. So it's a new and emerging career path born out of this revolution we're going through.
Tim, how much of a factor is skills in innovation's GM strategy? Mute.
It's a big part. It's a really big part. You know, and looking at how that's industry led. I mean, the other thing is, as well as technical skills, is skills such as leadership and management as well, which is something that's come out of again the sort of independent prosperity review that was done, and you know, on a number of different agenda items, such as, you know, not just innovation, but also, for example, international trade and exports, and you know, many of those things come down to leadership and management as well. And I mean, as Jim said, you know, part of it is about the ambition of business leaders as well, and their confidence in going for scale up, if you like. I mean, I think that's been one of the things that's actually really impressed me over the last sort of 5+ years. When I first started out in sort of Greater Manchester, you know, businesses never really got to a huge scale. They got to a certain relatively modest scale, then very often the owners would sell out, and then, you know, things would always be capped, and any growth would then go to the parent company, wherever that is. And I think over the last few years, what we've seen is a completely different level of ambition from business leaders, such as, you know, John Roberts at AO, or, you know, even the Aurora family, you know, the new proprietors of Asda even. I mean, these are huge deals that are being done now by our you know, our business people in the Northwest, by the Issa brothers, and the Hook Group. I mean, what Matt Moulding's done there, you know, to turn that company into a multi-billion-pound company, now worth what, over $6 billion, I think, is absolutely phenomenal. And it's just on it's a universe away, I think, from where we were even 5 years ago, certainly 10. And I think how that ambition, I know we talk about innovation, but I suppose what we've also got to be careful of is that we use language that everyday people use. Innovation is sometimes more government or an academic type of term, you know, whereas product development, you know, sort of business model transformation and development, maybe sometimes more regular use of sort of the, you know, terminology that is in effect innovation. And so it's how some of it is how we get technical skills in and actually build the skills so that when people scale up, that they've got the talent there on the doorstep to be able to scale up and scale up quickly. But also some of it is that leadership and management, and how we use, you know, there's a peer-to-peer program at the moment, for example, that the growth company run, which is about putting those leaders together so that where some leaders have success and really are able to grow and scale, that they can pass that on and mentor other people. And I think that's a really important part, the leadership element of skills, as in addition, should I say, to the technical element of skills, whether it be digital or manufacturing-based technical skills, that then give the quantum of talent locally for those businesses to scale up and achieve the ambitions that the business leaders have.
We're coming to the close of our session, so I just have one question, which perhaps you could all have a go at. The industrial strategy talks about the 4 grand challenges: AI, aging society, mobility, clean growth. Is that still the right framework, and how are we doing in terms of delivering against that? Perhaps we could start with Neil.
Is it the right framework? Well, arguably, if it's the framework that's going to get funded, it's the right framework. So, government's putting a lot of money behind the grand challenges. I think that we have to, and they clearly, the 4 grand challenges clearly still have relevance. I think what they've done in terms of identifying specific missions within the grand challenges, because each of those are huge areas, has been very helpful and has started to focus minds a bit more. I think the North certainly has opportunities within each of the individual grand challenges. Kind of goes back a little bit to what Jim was identifying earlier on. Clean growth, clearly there's a strength in the North. Life sciences, there's a strength in the North, and so how that plays into aging society. And advanced manufacturing in terms of things like AI going forward. So I think there's a lot of opportunity there. So yeah, there's a lot to go at.
Tom, AI is the top grand challenge. How do you think we're doing with that?
Yeah, and I think AI is the grand challenge for everyone globally. So, and I think the 4 grand challenges, or however many there are, you could put those as a blanket over any country, any region, any sector. So I think, regardless of how well I think we're doing, I think the real test is how do we make those challenges very, very specific to what we're talking about here, which is the North. So what is the role of the North specifically in each of those 4 areas? Because there's no point trying to be good at all of them or trying to be good at the breadth of all of them. Let's just be specifically focused, known for something, identify it quick and invest in it heavily. That will be my message.
Tim, to finish us off, is there one of the grand challenges that's more important to Greater Manchester than any of the others?
Well, not really, because I think a lot of them are interrelated as well and support each other. So in order to have clean growth, and obviously we have the net zero target we have at 2038, we need future mobility. We need new transport in order to fulfill that. So those 2 are very interrelated, and obviously as we decarbonise, then it has an impact on healthy ageing as well. So it will be digital solutions through AI, etc., that give us some of the platforms to achieve all these things. So for me, they're very integrated in many ways. And whereas I accept Tom's point around focus, and you can't necessarily be good at everything, but I think because they're so interrelated, it's hard necessarily to not cross over a number of them, really. And certainly as part of the local industrial strategy, healthy ageing is a big part of that for Greater Manchester. AI and data, particularly in cyber security, is where we're doing a huge amount of work, obviously in Greater Manchester around the GCHQ investment and the cluster that's forming around that. And then, as I say, clean growth is really, well, it has to be a priority if we're going to meet our 2038 target. So certainly 3 of the 4 are very, very important for us. And as I say, in order to tackle the clean growth, we're going to have to address transport. So yeah, I think certainly they have absolute relevance to what we're doing at the moment. And as Neil said, if that's where government funding flows as well, then that's something to capitalise on as well.
Great. Tim Newns from MIDAS, Neil Murray from Impact Data Metrics, and Tom Davies from Robiquity. Thank you very much for your support today and your insights you've shared with us. A very interesting session, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference.
Thanks, Chris.
Thank you. We'll close there.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Chris.
Bye.